Welcome, restless souls, to Carman's Crypt. I'm Carman Carrion, keeper of forgotten tales and curator of nightmares. You've wandered into my domain, where each week I unearth a fresh horror from the depths of human imagination. In these darkened halls, stories wait like hungry shadows. Each tale we've collected whispers of terrors both ancient and new. From crumbling mansions where something skitters behind the walls, to that strange text message you received at 3 a.m. from a number that shouldn't exist. So gather close. The candles are lit, the shadows grow long, and the witching hour is upon us. Are you prepared to face what lurks in the darkest recesses of Carman's Crypt? Lock your doors, still your nerves, and remember, here, every fear comes to life. This is Carman's Crypt. Your sanctuary of scares awaits. They say the first Bonecage Fair began with tragedy, but then most traditions in Harrowmaw do. Eli Thorpe had heard this story 100 times, first from his grandmother, then from the local children who whispered it during sleepovers, and finally from Father Marsh himself during the annual sermon that preceded the fair. But as Eli sat in the old church's back pew, watching the ancient priest's trembling hands on the pulpit, he realized this would be the last time he would hear it from the source. Father Marsh was dying. Everyone knew it. His once imposing frame had shrunk, his skin hanging from his bones like wet parchment. The candlelight caught in the hollows of his cheeks, making shadows pull there like ink. Only his eyes retained their unnerving intensity, almost luminous in the dimness of the church. "I was 9 years old," Father Marsh began, his voice surprisingly strong despite his frailty, "when the Pale Ones first came to Harrowmaw." Eli leaned forward. He had heard the beginning 100 times, but something about Father Marsh's tone suggested this telling would be different. "They came from the sinkhole in Teller's Field, what we now call the Maw." The priest paused, his eyes scanning the congregation. "Most of you have only seen the Pale Ones during the fair, when they wear their ceremonial garb and perform their rituals for our entertainment." The words seemed to catch in his throat. "But I saw them before we had our arrangement, before the fair. I saw what they truly were." A murmur swept through the church. This was not part of the usual telling. "They were playing a game when they emerged," Father Marsh continued. "A terrible game with a human skull, tossing it back and forth. They called it Bonecage. They had filled the skull with something that glowed and pulsed, something alive." Eli felt a cold prickle move up his spine. In all the tellings he had heard, the Pale Ones had been described as frightening, but ultimately benevolent creatures who had established the fair as a gesture of goodwill after accidentally frightening some local children. The skull game had always been mentioned, but never in such detail. "Their skin," Father Marsh was saying, his voice dropping to a near whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the church, "wasn't pale because they were albinos, or suffered some condition, as we've always allowed people to believe. Their skin was pale because it was translucent. I could see things moving beneath it, glowing things, like fireflies, but somehow wrong. And their hands." Mayor Coleridge stood up suddenly. "Father Marsh, perhaps we should move on to the blessing for this year's fair. The children are getting restless." Father Marsh fixed the mayor with those unnervingly bright eyes. For a moment, Eli thought the old priest might object, but then he nodded slowly. "Yes, of course, the blessing." He reached beneath the pulpit and produced a small wooden box. From it, he withdrew what looked like a piece of yellowed ivory curved into a half-moon shape. "With this token of goodwill, I bless this year's Bonecage Fair," Father Marsh intoned, raising the object high. "May the games bring joy to all of Harrowmaw, and may our arrangement with those who dwell in the maw continue for another year." The congregants murmured their assent, though Eli noticed several exchanging uneasy glances. The story had never deviated from its sanitized version before. After the service, as people filed out of the church to begin preparations for the fair, Eli lingered. He watched as Father Marsh carefully returned the ivory token to its box, his hands shaking more now that he thought himself unobserved. "Father Marsh?" Eli approached the altar hesitantly. The old priest looked up, seeming unsurprised to find Eli there. "Ah, young Thorpe. I wondered if you might stay behind. Your story today, it was different." Father Marsh's lips quirked into something that might have been a smile on a less gaunt face. "I'm dying, Eli. The doctors give me a month, perhaps less. I see little reason to maintain certain fictions. The pale ones aren't what we've been told, are they? They are precisely what I described today, and worse." The priest closed the box with a decisive click. "Do you know why we have the fair every year, Eli? The real reason?" Eli shook his head. "The stories say it's to commemorate the day they first came to Harrowmaw, a celebration of two worlds meeting." "A pretty lie." Father Marsh's words had dropped to a whisper again. "We have the fair because we must, because it's the price we pay." "The price for what?" "For them to stay in the maw, for them to take only what we give them, rather than coming into town whenever they please to take whatever and whomever they want." A chill ran through Eli. "And what do we give them exactly?" Father Marsh's eyes seemed to glow brighter in the shadowed church. "Haven't you ever wondered why some children are chosen to be special performers in the fair? Why those children always seem different afterward? A bit quieter, a bit more prone to staring at nothing for hours at a time." Eli felt his mouth go dry. His cousin Meredith had been a special performer 3 years ago. She had stopped speaking afterward, and sometimes Eli would find her sitting in the garden, perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the distant hills where the maw was located. "This year's fair will be different," Father Marsh said, his voice taking on an urgent quality. "I've maintained the arrangement for 60 years, but I won't be here for the next one. Someone must take my place as intermediary." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've been watching you, asking questions. Your grandmother tells me you've been researching the history of Harrowmaw, digging through old newspapers, interviewing the elders. You know there's something wrong with the story we tell." It was true. Eli had become fascinated with the town's history, especially the blank period in the records just before the first fair. It was as if someone had deliberately removed any documentation from that time. "What happens if no one takes your place?" Eli asked. "Then the arrangement fails, and they come out of the maw." Father Marsh leaned closer. "Do you want to know what happened to the other children who were there with me that day? The day we first saw them?" Eli nodded, though something in him screamed not to listen. "They were taken, dragged down into the maw. I alone escaped, and only because—" Father Marsh's hands went to his collar, unbuttoning the top few buttons to reveal his neck and upper chest. Eli stifled a gasp The skin there was mottled with a network of pale, glowing lines, like luminescent veins just beneath the surface. They marked me, made me their go-between. It hurts, Eli. Every day it hurts, but it's kept them at bay. When I die, the mark will fade, and the arrangement will need to be renewed with a new intermediary. Why me? Eli managed to say, though his voice sounded strange to his own ears. Because you're curious, because you seek truth, and because... The priest reached out and touched Eli's cheek with one cold finger. Because they've already noticed you. Haven't you felt it? When you stand near the edge of the maw, the sensation of being watched. Eli had. On his walks, he sometimes found himself drawn to the sinkhole, standing at its edge and staring down into its depths. Sometimes he thought he could hear voices calling up from below, speaking words just beyond his comprehension. The fair begins at sundown, Father Marsh said, buttoning his collar again. Meet me at the maw an hour before. I'll show you what must be done. And if I refuse? Father Marsh's expression softened with something like pity. You won't. You can't. Not anymore. The day of the fair dawned bright and clear, but by afternoon, clouds had gathered, casting Harrowmaw in premature twilight. The town square bustled with activity as vendors set up their stalls and workmen assembled the strange, twisted carnival rides that only appeared for the Bonecage Fair. Eli wandered through the preparations in a daze, Father Marsh's words echoing in his mind. Twice he caught himself walking toward the path that led to the maw, as if pulled by an invisible thread. Excited for tonight? The voice startled him. It was Sarah Enfield, a girl from his class who'd always seemed too bright, too vibrant for the perpetual gray of Harrowmaw. Not really, Eli admitted. I am Sarah. Her eyes gleamed. I'm a special performer this year. They chose me last week. Eli's blood ran cold. You're what? A special performer. I get to go into the special tent and play games with the pale ones. My mom says it's a great honor. Sarah, I don't think. It's going to be amazing, she continued, not seeming to notice his concern. I've been practicing my dancing. Do you want to see? Without waiting for an answer, Sarah began to move in a strange, jerking manner, her limbs bending at odd angles. It wasn't like any dance Eli had ever seen. It looked almost like someone was pulling strings attached to her limbs. Do you like it? Sarah asked, her voice oddly flat despite the question. They taught me in my dreams. Who taught you? The ones beneath, she said, still moving in that unsettling rhythm. The ones who wait in the maw. They've been whispering to me ever since I was chosen, teaching me how to move properly when they put the light inside me. Sarah, listen to me. I don't think you should go to that tent tonight. Sarah stopped dancing abruptly. When she looked at him, her eyes seemed different somehow, the pupils slightly too large. But I have to, she said. We all do, eventually. Even you, Eli. Especially you. She turned and skipped away, her movements returning to those of a normal teenage girl. Eli watched her go, a sense of dread settling over him like a shroud. He knew then that he would meet Father Marsh at the maw, not because he wanted to become the next intermediary, but because he needed to understand what was happening to his town and to Sarah. The path to the maw wound through Harrowmaw's outskirts, past abandoned farmhouses and fields that hadn't been tilled in generations. As Eli walked, the afternoon dimmed further, the clouds overhead growing heavier and more ominous. He found Father Marsh exactly where he'd said he would be, standing at the edge of the massive sinkhole that gave Harrowmaw its name. The maw was at least 50 feet across, a perfect circle cut into the earth as if by some enormous drill. Its walls descended straight down into darkness, no bottom visible from the edge. "You came," Father Marsh said without turning. "I knew you would. I want answers before I agree to anything." "Of course you do." The priest turned to face him, and Eli had to suppress a gasp. In the days since the church service, Father Marsh had deteriorated dramatically. His skin was now almost as transparent as he'd described the pale ones, blue veins clearly visible beneath. And his eyes, they glowed outright now, casting pale blue light onto his sunken cheeks. "What's happening to you?" Eli asked. "The mark is preparing to leave me," Father Marsh said. "It needs a new host." "What exactly is the mark?" Father Marsh gestured for Eli to follow him as he began circling the maw. "Do you know the real history of Harrowmaw, before the settlers came?" Eli shook his head. "This land was sacred to the native tribes who lived here, not because they revered it, but because they feared it. They knew what lived beneath the earth here. They kept it appeased with offerings." "Human sacrifices?" Eli asked, his voice catching. "Of a sort, but not as you're imagining." They had reached the part of the maw where a narrow path spiraled down along its wall. Father Marsh began descending, and after a moment's hesitation, Eli followed. When the settlers drove out the natives, they unknowingly interrupted the offerings. That's when the maw opened, a direct passage to somewhere else. The pale ones emerged, curious about the surface world, hungry for new experiences. As they descended, the air grew colder, and Eli noticed a faint luminescence coming from the walls, tiny glowing organisms embedded in the rock face. "What do they want?" Eli asked. "To experience, to consume. Not flesh, but sensation, emotion. They can't feel as we do, not naturally, but they found a way to borrow our capacity for it." They had reached a small ledge about 30 feet down. Father Marsh stopped and turned to face the wall, where Eli now saw a narrow crevice, just wide enough for a person to slip through. "This is where it begins," Father Marsh said. "The threshold between their world and ours. Beyond this point, reality shifts." "And the fair? The special performers?" "A controlled exchange. We give them a few children each year, just for a short time, and they're allowed to experience through them, to feed on their emotions, their sensations. In return, they stay below and don't take whoever they want, whenever they want." "That's monstrous," Eli said, backing away. "Is it? The children return physically unharmed. Changed, yes, but alive. Before the arrangement, the pale ones would emerge at night and simply take people. Dozens disappeared in those early days. And your role in this, the intermediary?" Father Marsh's glowing eyes fixed on Eli. "I carry a piece of them inside me, a fragment that lets me communicate with them, negotiate the terms each year. It's been inside me since I was a child, growing, changing me." "And now you want to put it in me?" It's not about what I want, Eli. It's about what's already begun. Haven't you felt it calling to you? Haven't you dreamed of the maw? Eli wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. For months, his dreams had been filled with visions of descending into darkness, of pale hands reaching for him, of voices speaking in a language that hurt his ears, but somehow made perfect sense. The fragment recognizes something in you, Father Marsh continued. A compatibility. It's already preparing to transfer. That's why you came today, despite your misgivings. There has to be another way. Eli said, We could warn people, evacuate the town. Father Marsh laughed, a hollow sound that echoed in the maw. And go where? Do you think the pale ones couldn't follow? The maw is just one entrance. There are others, all over the world, thin places where their reality bleeds into ours. No, Eli, the arrangement isn't perfect, but it's the best solution we found. He placed his hands on Eli's shoulders, and Eli was shocked at how light they felt, as if the old priest was barely there at all. It's time, Father Marsh said. The fair will begin soon, and I must transfer the mark before the pale ones emerge for their annual feeding. And if I refuse, then Sarah and the other chosen children will be taken completely, not just borrowed. And next year, the pale ones will take more, and more the year after that, until there's no one left in Harrowmaw. Eli closed his eyes, thinking of Sarah's strange dance, of his cousin Meredith's empty stare, of all the special performers over the years who had returned changed. Will it hurt? He finally asked. Father Marsh's grip tightened slightly. Yes, every day for the rest of your life, but you'll get used to it, and you'll learn to negotiate better terms over time, as I did. Perhaps one day, you'll find a better solution than I could. How is it transferred? Instead of answering, Father Marsh began unbuttoning his shirt again. The glowing veins Eli had glimpsed earlier now covered the priest's entire torso, pulsing with an unnatural light. At the center of his chest, something moved beneath his skin. A small spherical bulge that writhed as if trying to escape. It needs direct contact, Father Marsh said, his voice now strained. Flesh to flesh. It will hurt, but only for a moment. Eli wanted to run, to climb back up the spiral path and never look back. But the thought of Sarah, of the other children who would be in the special tent tonight, and he thought of Harrowmaw, his home, for all its flaws and secrets. All right, he said quietly. I'll do it. Father Marsh smiled, revealing teeth that glowed with the same pale light as his veins. Unbutton your shirt. With trembling fingers, Eli complied. The cold air of the maw raised goosebumps on his exposed skin. Father Marsh leaned forward, pressing his chest against Eli's. Immediately, a searing pain shot through Eli's body, as if something white-hot was burning its way into him. He tried to scream, but no sound came out. He felt it then, the fragment, the mark, whatever it was, moving from Father Marsh into him. It was alive, conscious. As it entered him, Eli's mind was suddenly flooded with images. The maw opening for the first time, the pale ones emerging, the first terrified settlers fleeing or being dragged below, and then arrangements, negotiations, The first fair. Decades of carefully maintained balance. And beneath it all, the true nature of the Pale Ones. Not creatures from below, but from elsewhere. From a place so alien that human minds could barely comprehend it. A place where emotion was unknown, where sensation was a precious commodity, worth crossing through dimensional boundaries to obtain. Just as suddenly as it had begun, the pain stopped. Eli fell back, gasping, his hand going to his chest, where he could feel something moving beneath his skin, settling into place between his ribs. Father Marsh had collapsed to his knees, his skin now fully transparent, his body seeming to fold in on itself like paper in water. "It is done," the priest whispered, his voice now barely audible. "You are the intermediary now. Go to the fair. The Pale Ones will recognize you. They will obey the terms, but only if you are present." "Father Marsh, I don't know what to do." "You will. The mark will guide you. It wants the arrangement to continue as much as we do." The priest's form was dissolving now, his features blurring like a watercolor painting left in the rain. "One last thing, Eli. The children, after the Pale Ones have finished with them, they'll be different. Be kind to them. It's not their fault." And then Father Marsh was gone, leaving behind only a faint, glowing residue on the stone floor of the ledge. Eli stood there, shaking, aware of the new presence inside him. It pulsed in time with his heartbeat, warm and cold simultaneously. With each pulse, he became more aware of presences behind the crevice in the wall, waiting, hungry. They're coming soon, he realized, for the fair, for the children. He turned and began climbing back up the spiral path, moving faster than he would have thought possible. He had to get back to town, had to be at the fair before sundown, had to ensure the arrangement was maintained. As he climbed, he felt the mark shifting inside him, spreading tendrils of sensation through his body. And with a shock of horror, he realized he was beginning to feel their hunger. The Pale Ones' desperate need for human emotion, human sensation. Worse, a part of him was beginning to understand it, to sympathize with it. Is this how it begins? He wondered as he reached the top and began running toward Harrowmaw, where the lights of the fair were just starting to come on against the darkening sky. Is this how Father Marsh started his descent? But even as the thought formed, he knew he would go through with it. He would maintain the arrangement, make sure only a few children were borrowed each year, make sure the Pale Ones stayed in the maw, because the alternatives were unthinkable. The fair was in full swing when Eli arrived, breathless and with a strange glow visible beneath his hastily buttoned shirt. No one seemed to notice as he pushed through the crowd toward the center of the festivities, where a large tent stood apart from the others, its entrance guarded by two tall, thin figures in elaborate ceremonial masks. The Pale Ones, disguised, but Eli could sense them now, could feel their alienness, their hunger. They turned as he approached, and though their faces were hidden, he knew they recognized what he carried inside him. They bowed slightly, stepping aside to let him enter the tent. Inside, 7 children, including Sarah, stood in a circle, their faces blank, their eyes unfocused. In the center of the circle lay an actual human skull, its top removed, filled with a glowing, writhing substance that pulsed with the same light now spreading through Eli's veins. "The Bonecage game," Eli whispered, understanding flooding him as the mark shared its knowledge. More pale ones stood around the perimeter of the tent, their disguises more minimal here, just robes covering their translucent bodies, their glowing inner organs visible as shadowy shapes beneath. One stepped forward, taller than the others, its movements fluid, yet somehow wrong, as if it had too many joints. It regarded Eli silently, then nodded once. The mark inside Eli's chest grew warm, and he understood without words. 7 children, 7 nights, then return. The children started moving in that strange, jerky dance he'd seen Sarah perform earlier. The pale ones shed their robes, their translucent bodies now fully visible, skinless, organs and muscles visible, glowing with inner light. They approached the children, one by one, placing their hands on the children's faces. With each touch, a child would gasp, their eyes rolling back, their bodies going rigid. Eli could feel it happening, the pale ones extending their consciousness into the children, experiencing human sensation through them. The children's emotions flowed through the connection: fear, confusion, wonder, horror, and eventually a strange ecstasy as the pale ones manipulated their nervous systems. It went on for hours, the pale ones trading places, each taking turns with different children. Throughout it all, they made no sound, communicated no pleasure or satisfaction, only silent, alien intensity. When it was over, the children collapsed like puppets with cut strings. The pale ones retreated, sated for now, their bodies growing brighter than before. The tall one approached Eli again, fixing him with expressionless eyes. Through the mark, Eli felt its acknowledgement. The arrangement continues. Eli nodded, feeling the weight of it settle on him like the earth of a grave. The pale one inclined its head before gliding away to join the others as they filed out through a back entrance of the tent. Eli moved to the children, checking each one. They were breathing, their pulses steady, but their eyes stared at nothing, and occasionally their limbs would twitch in remembered movements. "I'm sorry," he whispered to them, to Sarah especially. "I'm so sorry," as he helped them to their feet, guiding them outside where their parents waited to take them home. Eli felt the mark pulse inside him again. It would be with him for decades, until eventually, like Father Marsh, he would need to pass it on. The new mediator of Harrowmaw. And so, dear listeners, we emerge from another dark corner of Carman's crypt. But remember, the horrors you've heard tonight are merely echoes of the terrors that await in the shadows of your own mind. If you enjoyed your stay in the crypt, why not invite a friend to join us next week? After all, fear is best when shared. Leave a review if you dare, or share your own tales of terror on my social media. Who knows, your nightmares might just become my next story. Until next time, keep checking under your bed. And remember, in Carman's crypt, every fear comes alive, and no one is truly safe. Sweet dreams, if you can still sleep at all.